position is whether the United States should use offensive cyber operations or not. Me and Ishan are going to say why the U.S. should use offensive cyberation. Ben and Simon are going to say why they aren't. So we're going to start off with why we should. All right. Are y'all ready?
Yep.
We are firm. Our first contention is the new frontier of battle. Rebuttal finds in 2018 that in the lieu of more traditional approaches to terror, the Trump administration has authorized the Department of Defense and U.S. Cyber Command to use offensive cyber operations against global terrorist organizations, which have provided crucial in reducing terrorism worldwide. OCOs are crucial to finishing the fight in two major arenas. The first is the Middle East. U.S. OCOs are critical to fighting terror for two reasons. The first is cutting off funding. Kalamachi in 2019 explains that ISIS has diversified its portfolio to the point where traditional operations, such as airstrikes, are not sufficient to take out its funding. Critically, Temple finds this year that because ISIS changed the way it operates, the U.S. has already begun to use cyber operations against terror financing, and it has been successful thus far. This is important, as Sales in 2019 finds that if it is not enough to stop the gunmen on the ground, the only complete way to take out ISIS is to take out their financial assets. Second is killing cyber recruitment. Because of the low cost and convenience of cyber warfare, Beta in 2019 finds that terrorists are shifting online for recruitment, funding, and attack planning. Empirics prove, as Bashar finds in 2019, that in Bangladesh, a hotspot for ISIS recruitment, where 3/4 of militants are recruited, 82% of militants were recruited online. Beta in 2017 explains that offensive cyber operations are used to bring down media platforms that are important to recruiting. The reason why international recruitment for ISIS has collapsed is because of OCOs. Empirically, Bomber in 2019 finds that the 2017 U.S. cyber attack on ISIS halted their digital campaign along with terror recruitment capacity. Rogers in 2018 explains that ISIS has lost 98% of their land because of U.S. OCOs. Without the continued use of OCOs, we risk the return of extremist groups such as ISIS as they continue to shift online. There are two impacts. The first is preventing a power grid attack on the U.S. Charlton finds that ISIS has been attempting to recruit expert hackers to hack Western networks. Doffman finds this would inevitably materialize in an attack on the vulnerable U.S. power grid. This would be devastating because Pry in 2015 finds that an attack by ISIS on the U.S. power grid would cause a year-long nationwide blackout, which could kill over 100 million people from starvation and total societal collapse because our society relies heavily on grids. Second is stopping the resurgence of ISIS. Hubbard of the New York Times finds that due to the United States pulling out of the troops from Syria and the Middle East and abandoning the Kurds, this would spell a perfect storm for the resurgence of ISIS, as there is now a power vacuum in the region. Fortunately, Lamoth finds that cyber strikes against ISIS have culminated, end quote, destruction in the adversary on an epic scale. Stomping out terrorism is crucial, as Dudley finds in 2018 that in 1 year alone, terror groups killed 20,000 people, and the instability they caused, for example, the Syrian civil war killed 500,000 and left millions had to become refugees. Contention 2 is preventing a conventional war. Smeets in 2018 explains that OCOs allow for action within the gray zone of foreign activities, neither war nor peace. In this way, going cyber is pre-escalatory. Valeriano of Cato in 2019 explains that cyber has become a substitute for riskier military operations. That's why Scotsman in 2000 writes that Israel was preparing to take unilateral military action against Iran. Instead, Stanger of Air Force 18 explains that the U.S. stepped in, convincing Israel that there was a third option, launching a cyber attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. The attack called Stuxnet was far more strategic than a physical strike. Later in 2011 continues that the positive views of the effectiveness of Stuxnet impacted the Israeli debate over the military option, tipping the balance against striking and starting a war. Scott of Mason University explains that if the equivalent of Stuxnet virus had been carried out, Iran would have escalated kinetically. The US's OCOs is far more preferable. As Bregman of the New York Times explains, that an Israel strike would do little to the Iranian nuclear development, and this is bad because an Iran and Israel war would have killed 90 million citizens, and Kordsman of CSIS explains that Israel and Iran would seek to inflict the maximum possible casualties on its opponent to destroy its ability to recover as a nation. Because we prevent war and we kill a lot of terrorists, vote for us.
All you ready?
Yeah.
Ben? Alright, So once again, judges, we are the side saying that you should not have cyber operations because they're bad, and they are the side saying they're good. To prevent the incoming cyber Cold War, we negate the resolution of this law. The benefits of the United States federal government usage of offensive cyber capabilities outweighs the harms. Our sole contention is escalation. In the status quo, the United States has grown increasingly reliant on offensive cyber operations, or OCOs, as Jalal of NBC News finds in 2019 that the U.S. Cyber Command has conducted more operations this year than in the past 10 years combined. Unfortunately, this most recent wave of attacks is incredibly risky, as Jalal continues that there is no developed doctrine for cyber warfare, and as such, they often have unforeseen consequences. Unfortunately, the United States' reckless use of OCOs propagates unnecessary conflict in 4 key ways. The first is through an arms race. Much like in the Cold War, Fronte of Fordham University finds this past Monday that the uptick in U.S. OCOs has angered and frightened other countries, which incentivizes them to ramp up the development of cyber weapons. This isn't just us talking, as history proves our point. Andrea of Reuters reports that after the U.S. launched a cyber attack known as Stuxnet on Iran in 2010, Iran drastically increased their funding of cyber weapons. The shift to cyber buildup as a new norm will also correspond to new threats, as Wyden of the University of Liverpool writes in 2018 that because countries engaged in an arms race develop new capabilities quickly and securely, they are much more likely to have weapons. Concerningly, when these weapons are in the hands of a small, ideologically violent hacker group like Anonymous, they can easily be deployed against the U.S. at a moment's notice. Not only does it increase state development of cyber capabilities, but it will also increase terroristic capabilities. In fact, Chen writes in 2014 that Stuxnet also caused terrorist organizations to build up their cyber capabilities, and in the next strike, there's a 50% chance they will use a cyber attack compared to a 0% before Stuxnet. The second way the U.S. use of OCOs propagates conflict is through retaliation. If you corner a tiger, you give it no choice but to lash out. Similarly, Hillia of Columbia University indicates in 2019 that rather than being deterred by OCOs, states actually increase their offensive operations against the U.S. Healy continues that Stuxnet caused Iran to mount a massive but unsuccessful counterattack on U.S. financial infrastructure along with Saudi Aramco. Worryingly, he concludes that adversaries are developing cyber capabilities far, far faster than anticipated, making the likelihood of a retaliation much, much larger. The third way escalation occurs is through posturing. The United States' use of OCOs has generated an increase in foreign aggression and posturing, as Slayton of Cornell University finds in 2018 that the secretive nature of offensive operations will increase adversary suspicion and distrust of the aggressors. Slayton concludes that high levels of mistrust can cause aggressors to perceive even harmless cyberspace operations as a threat to national security, as did the U.S. in the 2016 election hacks, forcing an even more aggressive response as the U.S. retaliated. Specifically, Kaplan of MIT argues in 2019 that tensions between Russia and the U.S. have therefore been pushed to the brink by the recent wave of cyber attacks, concluding that the current reckless U.S. use of offensive operations risks escalation into a full-on war with Russia at literally any given moment. The fourth way is private military companies like Blackbeard. Herbert writes that the U.S. government has an extremely difficult time in hiring cyber professionals, especially when it's 3 to 4 times more expensive and more time-consuming to train cyber warriors than to just buy them, which consequently is what the U.S. has turned to. Monk writes in 2018 that military reliance on private military companies, or PMCs, has risen by 35 times what it used to be in 2006, with military industrial complexes and the U.S. Cyber Command commonly turning to them for help. This has created a revolving door in which these companies abuse their connections to Congress and the government to lobby for more war to garner more benefits for their companies. This is key because it can only bring us into unknown wars and more problems in the future. By using cyber attacks, we can currently normalize these attacks and therefore put a target on our backs. Unfortunately, if our adversaries take the shot, the American people would invariably suffer in 2 key ways. The first scenario is grid collapse. Jalal of NBC News reports in 2019 that other countries such as Russia and Iran already have access to our very vulnerable grids, as prior to the United States government finds in 2015 that if this did occur and a cyber attack did happen on U.S. grids, 9 out of 10 Americans would die from total societal collapse because there's no more food production or storage. The second scenario is economic collapse. Kopp of the IMF writes in 2019 that financial institutions are increasingly being seen as a prime target for cyber attacks, with small businesses, 60% of them fall out of the loop just because of one cyber attack in the first 6 months. This is key because continuing the malicious disabling of infrastructure and financial would lead to cascading market failures and crash the U.S. economy, which is key because the IMF correlates that to 900 million people being in poverty from recession. For these reasons, and to avoid the cyber Cold War, we negate.
Ready for cross?
Yeah. You mind if I have the first question?
Sure.
Would you say that the electricity is pretty good?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty good right now.
So Iran and all these countries you talk about in the
Yeah.
case haven't A, knocked out our grid, or
Yeah.
B, caused a cascading market
We
failure.
agree.
So at what point do your impacts happen?
Okay, so our case is basically like this. As of right now, the United States is ramping up their ability and use of offensive cyber operations. So in the future, it is likely we will
When in
pass
the
the
future?
brink and lead to it.
When in the future?
Well, the Kaplan evidence in our case indicates it's going to occur very soon, so I would like
What
to
is
say
very
in the
soon?
next 5 years.
Next
Or
5
possibly
years?
a year.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. Can I have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so specifically on Israel. So 2 days ago, didn't Israel attack the Hamas using airstrikes and ground forces?
Well, geography tells us that Hamas is not located in
Yeah,
Iran,
that's
but
not what
in
I'm trying to say.
Palestine.
That's not what I'm trying to say. So did they use conventional forces against them?
Yeah, because they didn't have the
Okay.
alternative of OCOs. Can I
Okay,
take a
so
question?
they don't have the alternative of OCOs, so how is Israel in the future going to use OCOs?
Yeah, so instead of things like airstrikes, Israel would use
Yeah.
offensive cyber
All right,
operations
how do they get them?
through the United States.
So the United States just sends OCOs to them?
Yeah, Israel, if you didn't know already, the United States and Israel are very
Alright,
close allies.
that's cool,
We've
okay.
supported them since 1947, the independence
Alright.
of Israel.
So
May I
then
take a question?
That's still a problem. So if we are able to send them OCOs or cyber operations, why didn't we do that before they attacked the Hamas?
Because Hamas is a terrorist organization
Yes,
that is
but
in Israel.
we also argue that we should end up stopping terrorist organizations on your case.
But,
So then
okay.
why didn't they send
Yeah,
them
but
OCOs
you're
to combat
making,
this?
you're making what we call a false dichotomy, wherein Hamas uses conventional means, they are not shifting online,
Yeah.
whereas Iran's primary
But
use
they
of
still
attack is
could use
cyber.
OCOs, right?
Oh, yes, so let's use a
Okay.
computer virus against a grenade launcher. That doesn't make any
That's
sense.
not the argument. You can still shut them down.
Hamas does not use electronic means, they use conventional weapons.
Right? That doesn't make any sense, but you can have a question.
I don't know, okay. Let's go to your argument about let's go actually to arms race, right?
Cool.
So, actually, let's talk about posturing, right? So you say that the US and Russia are on the brink for war.
Yeah.
Okay, so how long have the United States and Russia been at conflict with each other?
They've been at conflict for quite a while, but
Okay.
the evidence in our case indicates that because of the recent tit for tat attacks that have been occurring, like for instance, the United States attacked the St. Petersburg Institute in Russia like a month ago. They're nearing towards the like.
Wait, so if the United States and Russia knows that the United States
Yeah.
attacked one of their financial institutions or whatever,
Yeah.
and Russia didn't do
governmental
anything.
institution. Well, that's not the argument. So, firstly,
Wait,
it takes a bit of time. for
your
them to cyber
argument,
attack back.
your argument
But
is that,
secondly,
wait,
the
wait,
argument is
if I
also
may,
that as they attack,
if
they
I
lead to
may,
attacks in the future.
your argument is that Russia will get mad and start a war.
Yeah.
But if Russia knows that we've been attacking them forever now and they haven't responded, I don't see how your impact's gonna
Okay,
manifest.
so
But
that's
you can
also
have a
not
question.
that's also not the argument. We
Yeah.
tell you that they have been responding, but in the next response, it is likely to cause a war. That's the
Well,
big problem. So
well, why
as
will
of
it
right
cause a war?
now,
Why will it
as
cause
of
a
right
war?
now, we have been building up attacks towards one another, and as of right now, the other countries are starting to get scared. They're like, well, what if the next attack is the big one that sets off the chain reaction? So because of this, they are more likely to cause a war in the future, and that is the Kaplan evidence in our case, which indicates that if it does continue, it will cause a war, and I believe that's crossed.
Yeah. We're going to-
That was 6 seconds.
Cool.
Okay. This is the speech where I'll be attacking Ben and Simon's case, which is saying that offensive cyber operations are bad. Okay. Is everybody ready?
Yeah.
Great. As a general response to their case, the fact we have not seen conflict or an attack on the US grid disproves all of their arguments. Because although in theory it sounds like other countries can escalate, in reality that's not what's happened. Instead, all we have seen is peace. Even though tensions have been rising, nothing has actually spilled over into conflict. Make them prove to you when it's going to happen and how severe it's going to be. But then, the second general response to their case is that if we were not using offensive cyber operations, we would have turned to conventional weapons. Look to our second argument about Israel. We tell you that offensive cyber operations gave us the third option and a way out of conflict that would actually kill people. This is why they cannot give you a single example of a cyber attack killing people, whereas we can give you multiple examples of conventional arms sending millions to death. But then, let's go to their specific arguments. The first is talking about an arms race. They cite the example of Stuxnet. The first thing we must realize is that knocking out Iran's capability will always be more important than increasing their intent. This is for two reasons. First of all, if Iran's capability is knocked out by Stuxnet, then overall, they physically cannot retaliate. But second of all, if Iran's capability is gone, they have no reason to escalate because then they have no ability to. Realize that this is the most important response to their arguments, because even though Iran got mad after Stuxnet, that never materialized into anything. Instead, before Stuxnet, Iran was on a path to war and a path to conflict. But because Stuxnet derailed that process, we saw no conflict and no casualties. But second of all, realize that right now, mutually assured destruction, a process in cyberspace, is non-existent. Basically, other countries are freely and have the ability to attack others. But if the US uses OCOs, that sets a standard. Because the US is one of the biggest countries in the world, politically and economically. If they're the ones using OCOs, they're able to prove to other countries that OCOs have ramifications and can hurt countries. What this means is that even though things like arms races can happen, they never actually materialize. This is why, since 2006, countries have been using arms that we've seen no conflict. But then, on their second argument about retaliation, there are a couple issues here. The first of which comes from Barnes in 2019, which indicates that countries have not escalated because they don't want to bear the economic costs. But second of all, even if you buy they do retaliate, they don't retaliate most of the time. Because Villanaro indicates that only 30% of the time OCOs resulted in retaliation. But also, in those 30% of attacks, 70% of them were low-level attacks, meaning things like grid collapses and things like financial sector attacks don't occur. But then third of all, Stanford indicates that offensive cyber operations are de-escalatory in nature. Essentially, countries perceive that offensive cyber operations are willing to de-escalate conflict. This is why conflict has not occurred. But also, remember the response I put at the top of their case. If we weren't using OCOs, we would be using conventional weapons. I would say conventional weapons are worse because there's a history and track record of them doing bad things. But then, on their third argument about posturing, there are a couple responses to posturing as a whole. The first of which is this argument makes no sense. They're saying that they wouldn't know how an attack occurs. But take a look at Iran. Take a look at the example they cite you about Iran. When we attacked Iran, Iran knew exactly that it was the United States. There is no reason that countries won't know who attacks them. This argument makes no sense. But second of all, even though countries have been posturing, it is literally all talk and no action. Although countries have been saying they're going to go to conflict, they have not been going to conflict. This is why theories like escalation never occur. But also, on the idea of posturing, there is no contextualization of what these means. Make them prove to you why posturing increases the likelihood of conflict, and even if it does increase the likelihood of conflict, by how much. Empirically, all OCOs have done is shut off ISIS and provide better alternatives. But then, on their fourth argument about private military contractors, the first of which is that private military contractors exist in either world. If we weren't using offensive cyber operations, we would be using defensive cyber operations. But second of all, I would say conventional private military contractors are so much worse because take example the Yemeni civil war, private military contractors are the ones fueling it. But then also, they have to win that other countries want to retaliate in the first place, meaning they cannot win private military contractors by itself. But then on their impacts, specifically on grids, realize that no country would want to attack one of those grids, whereas terrorist organizations which have an incentive for conflict are only going to attack grids. This is why you always prefer our argument about grids over their argument about grids.
We'll take Brad.
Yeah. That was 44 seconds.
So this is going to be me defending my arguments. So basically responding to what he just said, and then attacking theirs. Is everyone ready? He gives you one overarching response that tells you we should have seen an attack yet if we've been using OCOs. But what they fundamentally misunderstand is it's the escalation of OCOs that pushes us into conflict. Yes, in the past, we have not used a lot of OCOs, so we haven't seen conflict. But the Delania evidence we reached with the top of case tells you that we have been constantly increasing our use of OCOs over the past 10 years. That will push us into conflict. Then they tell you without OCOs we would have used conventionals, but we're really specific in telling you, A, we have other things like sanctions, but B, I would say that OCOs will spill into conventional warfare. Then on the arms race, they tell you that right now Iran's capability, like the better move is to attack it and destroy it before it can start. But what they fundamentally misunderstand is after we used OCOs to attack Iran, they just scaled up their nuclear capabilities and scaled up their cyber capabilities. I would say at that point, you don't even see OCOs working. But then they tell you mutually assured destruction is going to stop everyone attacking each other. But we tell you we already see Russia attacking right now, and they're going to scale up if we continue on this path of destruction. Then they tell you countries don't want to escalate because of sanctions and stuff like that. But we tell you, A, we've seen attacks from Russia, and B, we've seen escalation from Iran. I would say you've already seen the countries escalate. They tell you 30% of attacks are really light work and are not that bad. But we tell you really specifically, as we scale up conflict, the attacks get worse and worse, and it pushes us into a worse conflict. But then on posturing, they tell you Iran knew it was the US attacking them. Our argument isn't that they don't know who they're being attacked by. It's that when I say I'm going to launch a cyber attack, I don't know if it means I'm hacking my brother's gaming computer or I'm destroying a nuclear power plant. That's what pushes them over the brink because they don't know what they're getting attacked by. And then they tell you it's all talk and no action, but we tell you when talk turns to action, that's when we see the negative effects happen. But let's go to their really flawed arguments. First, on this funding argument about ISIS. It's really flawed because ISIS doesn't need funding. As Clark tells you in 2018, that ISIS has more than $400 million in cash squared away with more money in gold. These holdings are physical and not subject to cyber attack. Clark additionally finds that ISIS has incredibly low operating costs and currently has the funding to finance successful guerrilla campaigns. Not only that, think about it. ISIS does its business in cash. When they attack countries, they attack them and steal their money and steal their gold. ISIS is not an all-digital terror regime. But then turn it against them because online financing is a luxury, not a necessity. If ISIS can't get the funding through digital means, they will use traditional methods of fundraising, including violent extortion and thefts, which is net worse than online donations. But then they talk about this social media and propaganda. First, think about this logically. They're telling you that shutting down Venmo pages and Twitter pages is going to end the ISIS regime, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. I would say that hardened feelings are a lot more than actions. Sure, I can be a radicalized American, but that doesn't mean I'm going to see a webpage and go join ISIS. Don't buy this really silly argument. But then there are two reasons why OCOs have actually been unsuccessful against propaganda. First, OCOs can't stop online propaganda. As David tells you, that terrorist cyber capabilities are redundant and decentralized. When you take down one terrorist website, two more take its place. But secondly, in US efforts against ISIS and social media, it's only been tentative and hesitant and emergent. As Briers and Mooney tell you in 2017, the responsibility has shifted between multiple organizations with zero cooperation. These organizations are decentralized and don't know what they're doing. But let's go into their second argument about conventional. First, Hudson tells you in 2019 that Hamas attacked with a cyber attack and Israel responded with an airstrike. I would say at the point where we're not even seeing Israel use cyber attacks to their advantage when they're attacked by cyber, I would say you're not going to see the benefits result. But secondly, I would say that our case is really specific in telling you that these cyber attacks are going to spill over into conventional warfare. So you're going to see it happen either way. But furthermore, I would say that cyber still causes these conflicts because it's super vague. That's our posturing contention. When you attack with a cyber attack, people don't know what they're going to go, so they scale up into conventional war, which in the end is way, way worse. For all these reasons, you should negate. Ready for cross?
1 second. Okay, I'm ready. May I take the first question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Let's specifically talk about our case.
Yeah.
You tell me Russia and Iran attacked the United
Yeah,
States,
we-
right? Can you give me examples of those attacks?
Yeah, okay. When Iran attacked banks in the US causing $10 billion in damage.
Okay. What did that go terminalize into?
We
Because-
told you,
okay, so what does Russia
people
do?
lost millions of dollars, billions
Okay,
of dollars.
can Iran hack a US grid?
Yes.
Okay, then why haven't they done so in the past?
We tell you because we haven't scaled up to the point
So
where...
how much OCOs are enough
Okay,
to push
you've had
Iran over
a lot of questions. Can I have a question?
Because you're not answering mine.
I answered your questions perfectly fine. I just think you're getting a bit heated. Okay, let's go on to this escalation argument, right? So you tell me that right now the reason we haven't seen, we should have seen conflict by now, right? But if we have not scaled up to the point that would have pushed another country over the edge, why would we have seen armed military conflict?
Okay, wait, can you give me examples of like military conflict?
Yeah, well, anything, right? You tell me we should have seen it by now. Why?
No. Our argument simply is that OCOs have prevented conflict from occurring.
Okay, you can have a question.
That's kind of our app case. But okay, so unlike what you think I'm doing about getting heated, these other countries aren't. Because if they have, so how much OCOs are going to be required for them to go over the brink? Because we've been attacking these countries constantly.
Yeah, well,
so how much more OCOs?
If you'll let me answer.
Yeah.
If I may. Okay, so we tell you really specifically, when we saw in Iran, right, we saw a multi-country attack on Iran that crippled their infrastructure.
I understand that,
We
yeah.
tell you, as Trump is scaling up his use of OCOs and as the US government is diverging more to them, they're allocating more funding, we tell you we're going to see more attacks like that.
When?
We tell you we're telling you we're seeing them right now.
When are they gonna trigger all of your impact?
So
with
as
grids?
the evidence, even the evidence you read me in case, which is pretty much a concession that tells me the US gave Israel OCOs to use. I would say
Okay, so
that's
then
a
why
very
haven't they
example
attacked?
as they
Why
stand.
haven't we seen your arguments happen?
We tell you really specifically, the Copland evidence also tells you that as we use more OCOs, right?
So my question is
think
just
about it
how
like
much more
this. If I
OCOs
can
and
answer
when is
your
it gonna
question, you're
happen?
being very rude, right? What I'm trying to tell you is as we use more and more attacks, right? What we see as countries get more and more angry, right?
Okay,
As you
but
poke the
how much
eagle
more,
more and
Ben?
more.
My
it's
question is
going
simply
to
how much more? Can you
We
give me
tell-
a number?
Yeah,
a
we
day?
tell you over the past 10 years, we've used OCOs more than we ever have before.
But
And I have a
when is it
question.
going to actually occur in conflict? My asking is when
I've
is it going to
answered
happen?
this a couple of times.
So when is it going to
Countries
happen?
get gradually more angry. Can I have a question?
But that's okay.
It
I have
does
a
answer
question.
the
It
question.
doesn't.
All right. So let's go specifically to this terrorism argument.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. How many people? Okay. Actually, yeah. So how much funding does ISIS have? How much funding have we taken away from ISIS in the past?
A lot. Of
Really?
funding.
A
A
lot?
lot of funding.
Was it 60 million? Because that was the last statistic I saw.
Okay, that might have been the last statistic you
Okay,
saw. That's
60 million in the last
clearly,
attack.
Ben, that our current events are a lot more
If
updated
I can just have a
because we say
question.
that more
If
than
I can have a
anything.
question.
But
So
also,
what is-
that's not
if I
the
can have a
argument.
question. If I-
Ben, you're misunderstanding
If I
our
may.
argument. I think this is
Yeah,
important for
can I
the
have a
debate.
question?
Our argument simply
If I
is,
may, okay.
if you
How
wanna ask
much
a question, that's
of
fine.
ISIS's budget? How big is ISIS budget?
I'm not sure. As you say, it's 400 million. But we're saying
No,
that
no,
there's
that's
slowly...
not what I say at all. It's $108 billion.
Okay, sure.
So at the point where it's $108 billion, what impact is 60 million?
no.
have?
Wait, it was 108 and they had
Thank
400
you.
in checks. That's a lot on one.
This is not a cross.
Yeah. They're shifting cyber right now. That's where the funding is going to go.
All right.
It is the very...
I'm gonna be starting on some things that he doesn't respond to that kind of lose him the round, and then I'm gonna explain why we're winning the round. Are y'all ready?
Yeah.
All right. On their argument, they tell you that United States use of OCOs causes escalation and retaliation. A few things he doesn't respond to. The first is the overarching attack Ishan gives you. He tells you that their argument is empirically false, as the United States has been using OCOs for the past 13 years and we haven't seen any escalation on our grids or our financial institutions. Secondly, we would say that OCOs provide a better alternative to conventional weapons. Wars in the Middle East and wars against terror require a lot of manpower, a lot of fighting, and ultimately lead to millions of casualties and millions of innocent deaths. Whereas if we use OCOs, it has directly not killed a single person and is inherently de-escalatory. That's why we have A, never seen a country go to war because of cyber operations, but two, we have never seen an innocent casualty because of offensive cyber operations. He tells you that countries will just keep escalating. But sure, that's all talk, but actions speak louder than words. Countries can say they're going to escalate, but at the point where they, one, don't want to go to war with the United States because the United States, one, has a stronger military, but two, will always have more money to spend on their cyber capabilities. No country like Iran, Russia, or China, no country will go to war with the United States. Secondly, they don't, at the end of the day, answer a few fundamental questions. When will these countries start a war? But two, which countries will start a war, and then why will they start a war? We would say that the Trump administration has been using OCOs the past 4 years, and there's no response. Even before the Obama administration, there hasn't been a response. Their argument just has very low probability. But then secondly, I would say that their argument also doesn't make a lot of sense. Things like posturing, countries would always hate the United States. They give the example of Russia. We put sanctions on Russia. That's probably why they're posturing against us. Or we support NATO, which is fighting them in the Baltics. Obviously, they don't understand geography very well. There's obviously other reasons why the United States and Russia are in conflict. But then on their argument about private military contractors, remember, we would say that there's always an alternative, and that alternative is worse. Things like private military contractors that lobby Congress for war and more conventional deaths will lead to more deaths. But then on their impact, first about grids, they never respond to what Ishan tells you. One is that countries don't want to attack our grids because they know that the United States and other countries are interconnected. So if their financial institutions and their global economies are linked up, they would never attack the United States. That's why in all of the 13 years we've used cyber attacks, they've never attacked us. Now let's go into our case. The number one reason you're going to be voting for us is on our second argument about preventing an Israeli war. We tell you that Iran was cyber attacking Israel before the United States used OCOs on their behalf. When the United States used OCOs, it showed to Israel that there was an alternative rather than going to war. This saved 90 million lives and would be prevented a year-long war that would have killed millions. Again, 90 million. Their only response is about Hamas. A few things here. First, we would say that Israel is now shifting to cyber capabilities. But secondly, Hamas, obviously, because they don't know geography, is located in Palestine, and Hamas uses a lot of conventional weapons. However, with Iran, a big country, they didn't want to go to war, and that's why the better alternative was using OCOs. Therefore, you vote for us. Thank you.
Basically, somebody is the door.
16.
Yeah, I would. No, you just have the prep.
You'll have about 30 seconds left.
You sure?
They have 46 seconds left.
Yeah, thank you, David, for giving time to do that.
44.
I mean, it's not about it.
Yeah.
Alright.
Are you going to run some more?
No, no, right. I'm just making sure my pen for balls in. Alright, so for a quick off-the-clock roadmap of what I'll be doing in this round, or this speech, I guess, I'll basically be going down our case and then stating why you should vote for us, and then going down their case and saying why you should still vote for us. Alright. Is everybody ready?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Ben? Alright. To start off at the top of our case, Ali makes the response that as of right now, there's been no escalation in the past. This is key, because the Jalalian evidence at the top of our case exactly tells you that in the past 10 years, it has been equivalent to this year alone in 2019, because the amount of attacks that Trump has used has increased by tenfold. He then makes the response that conventional warfare is going to be much worse, and that cyber warfare has never led to a direct death. Firstly, his own words himself take out the entire argument. The term direct implies that it did not mean anything from the cyber attack itself, but the escalation that ensues into conventional warfare, which is the response Ben makes in his rebuttal, is the thing that eventually leads to attacks and problems. For instance, the exact wars they state kill a lot of people. These are mainly because of cyber attacks. Secondly, the overall problem with cyber warfare is it is more likely to target civilians, as they are the most likely to end up being attacked, therefore making it worse in either world. They drop one really big thing here, and that is the arms race point which you make at the top of our case, basically stating in the Ferrante evidence that as of right now, the United States' uptick in OCOs has increased foreign aggression and fear of the United States. They make this argument themselves that it curtails other enemies into fear so they will not attack us. This is the exact reason that after Stuxnet, Iran attacked us in 2010. That's the Andrea evidence in our case. Not only does it lead to retaliation just as that ensues, but it also leads to capabilities. The Chen evidence at the bottom of our case tells you there was a 50% increase in capabilities because of Stuxnet. This implies and takes out literally all of their case. Because if you increase cyber capabilities, you increase the chances that a conventional war breaks out, just as the argument was previously made. They make a few more responses. They make 3 ambiguous questions as to who, what, when, where, and why. The why is telling you, as of right now, it's because of escalation. The second one, as of when, is now, because the Jalalian evidence indicates, and the Kaplan, that we are at a brink because of cyber. And the third evidence is, like who and what, is going to be Iran and other countries and other terrorist organizations that can increase our attacks. Finally, they make the response that overall, no one's going to attack the US because of their military and their cyber prowess. This does not matter because cyber attacks rely on taking out vulnerabilities, and there will always be vulnerabilities. In this case, if another country wants to attack, they can do so with ease. But secondly, the military alliance, they say, they themselves literally take out because the United States pulled conventional forces out of ISIS and areas like that, so therefore they can't respond with conventional or military alliances. This is key because it's going to lead to a major problem in the grid system. They make the argument that because grids are interconnected, that does not matter with a country like Iran because we are not physically connected by grids to Iran. This is key because the prior evidence indicates that if Iran or another country does escalate its attacks, it could lead to 9 out of 10 Americans dying. This outweighs literally any impact they can tell you in the round because it leads to entire societal collapse, and you can no longer give OCOs to countries like Israel. Now into their case, they drop quite a few things. The first is the holy evidence, which tells you at the bottom of their case about Israel, that as Hamas is able to use cyber attacks, but the United States did not give cyber back to Israel to counterattack, it means that there is no capabilities that the United States gives to Israel, which takes up their entire argument. But they also drop 2 terms. The first is the Davis evidence, which tells you that if you do take out capabilities, it means that everyone you take out, 2 more spawn. This acts as a direct turn to their case because it means you increase terrorism. You went 11 seconds over, can I continue? The second overall turn is the loser evidence, which tells you that when you decrease the finances of terrorist organizations, just as they say, you increase their capabilities. That's the problem. You should negate it.
Thank you for going over time.
Just as you did. Yeah.
And 20 seconds.
20 seconds. Everyone 20 seconds over.
Literally did not.
Yes, you did.
Stop it, are we doing final focus?
Okay.
Okay. Alright, is everybody ready for Grand Crossfire? Okay. In that case, may I take the first question?
Sure.
So, when asking when a conflict is going to happen, Simon answers now in summary. I just look outside the window and I see nothing but sunny skies.
Yeah.
So when is conflict going to occur?
Okay. Sure. I said now, I think all of us know that was a bit of a hyperbole. The initial
So your whole
response
entire
that I
case is
made that
hyperbole?
it's going to happen in the near future.
That's also not what a
because of the
hyperbole
escalation
is.
of attacks.
Can y'all let him
The
answer the
overall
question?
problem is going to be that when we increase attacks,
when-
just as the
when
United
is
States
it
has
gonna
done,
happen?
it's going to lead to escalation in the future and the very near future.
Wait, but you're
Which is
already-
specifically
see-
why when we attacked Russia last time for St.
If I may-
Petersburg, they responded
Yeah,
very quickly.
if I may, all arguments have to have a strong foundation,
Yeah.
right? The problem with your argument is that your evidence
So
says
what's
that
the
you,
question?
if I would finish, Crossfire, start asking
Yeah.
each other
Okay.
questions, okay? So, if the United States increases their attack, right?
Yeah.
So your evidence says that the United States increases their attack.
Yep.
But your evidence never says that other countries are increasing their attacks tenfold.
That is not the overall argument. Our argument is that even if they do increase the United States attacks tenfold, other countries, sure, even if they don't increase tenfold, it's going to increase to an amount where we see a war on our hands.
When?
I literally answered this question 2 seconds ago, basically saying
Near
in the
future?
very, very near future.
Okay,
Sure,
sure.
it's a bit ambiguous.
That's
but I
fine.
probably
You
say,
can take a question.
If my teacher told me
Nobody
this
can
one,
calculate, Ishan, nobody can calculate when war is going to break out. We tell you we are near a tipping point, and if we
Yeah.
continue on the path we are,
You can have a question.
Okay, so overall, in the case of Israel, so if the Hamas launched a cyber attack on Israel, why did Israel not respond with cyber?
So there's 3 things that you missed when you were taking notes. The first thing I said is that Israel is now starting to shift to more OCOs attack because they don't want to
Okay,
go.
so if they're shifting
Can I
right now,
finish my response?
but wait, I just need like a
Wait,
quick note.
and then there's
If
2
they're
other things
shifting
I
right
said.
now,
The
then that
other
would
thing
mean
I
they're
said
cyber,
was
right?
that Hamas is located very close to them in places
Yeah,
like
like a terrorist
Palestine,
organization,
and
right?
Hamas is
Okay,
a terrorist
so why did they
organization,
counter it?
and Hamas uses a lot of more conventional means. They don't really use cyber means.
But we literally tell you in our own evidence that they used a cyber attack against
Okay,
Israel.
so
why did they respond with cyber?
so using a cyber attack does not mean that they're in cyber war,
But
right?
they have cyber capabilities.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
fine. A lot of countries
Okay,
have
A lot of
so
countries
if they have cyber capabilities,
Yeah.
why
So-
don't they attack
so-
the main thing that they use
Okay,
themselves for?
okay,
They don't-
so,
That doesn't make any sense.
I can answer this question really simply.
Okay.
2 months ago, Hamas staged 50 rocket attacks against Israel, whereas you can only give me one instance of a cyber attack.
That
We
is
would
not
say,
true in the slightest.
true.
So
Wait,
the main
you're-
problem
you're-
here
wait,
is
wait,
that after
wait,
Israel,
you're making up evidence.
Simon,
after
Simon.
Israel retaliated for the
Simon.
50 barrages, they used a cyber attack again. So Israel
Okay, no.
should have responded with
No,
cyber, right?
So the problem with your argument is that Hamas is not a cyber threat, whereas ISIS and other
Okay.
terrorist organizations
You yourself
is.
say earlier.
May
in
I
the
please
loss-
finish, Simon?
Okay, that's fine.
That would be great.
That's fine.
Thank you. So Hamas is I don't know if you know geography. He's located in
You
Palestine.
keep insulting
Which-
us, but like,
which is
I'm
very
very
close
clear
to-
to
which is
you. If
very
Hamas
close-
has the ability
That's
to
cross-reference.
use a cyber research
Okay,
in cyber.
that's Kelly. You can cut us off soon.
Yeah. All right.
We'll take the last
We're gonna
minute of our
Yes. That they don't want to-
So what are we gonna, okay, dude, that is.
Yeah, that's our problem.
That's actually, like, no cap.
For real.
See, you gotta get up and lie.
What?
Not funny.
So as this is the final speech in the round, aside from theirs, I'm going to be just giving you reasons to vote for us. Starting off on our case. Okay. On our first argument about ISIS, first of all, this isn't talked about much, but they try to give you this argument that they increase terrorism. They don't tell you by how much and what that actually means. Instead, look to the most important argument in the round, that's our argument about Israel. We tell you that instead of using conventional warfare and other methods of conflict, offensive cyber operations gave Israel a third option and a way out that would kill 90 million people. The only response they give you is about Hamas. Ali gives you 3 responses to this argument. The first of which is that Israel is shifting cyber only now. This is why they did not attack. But second of all, they only attack small parts with conventional weapons. The ISIS and other big cyber threats won't be attacked with cyber. But third of all, Hamas uses conventional weapons in not cyber operations. This is why we did not respond in cyberspace. Instead, we're preventing future conflicts from occurring from big threats. This is the most probable impact in the round because you know it's already been prevented. Whereas you go to their case, where there's a bunch of holes. They don't tell you when a conflict is going to happen. The near future isn't a date and is really weak. But they don't tell you yet again how this will actually materialize. Actions will always speak louder than words. Although we've been using offensive cyber operations, they have never retaliated. This is why we've seen no direct deaths from offensive cyber operation. The only thing Simon says is that there have been indirect deaths. They can tell you how many indirect deaths there have been and how much they're going to increase. If they cannot pinpoint those numbers, you don't know a reason to vote for them. But then furthermore, they give you no reasons why countries want to attack. Obviously, war is bad on both. It's bad on both sides of the table. Make them prove to you how they're going to lash out and how much they're going to lash out and why they would lash out in the first place. But then, the only thing they talk about once in this entire round is their argument on an arms race. Remember what we keep telling you. If we knock them out specifically and give them a third option, a way away from conventional war, that is when peace occurs. So even if cyber capabilities they portray to be bad, the alternative is much, much worse. But then, on the impact, the reason their argument matters, they never tell you why this is going to happen. Because instead, we tell you that things like attacking the grid are super improbable because the grid relies on one another. The only thing they say is because they would just want to do it. This isn't really making real sense if obviously no country wants to hurt themselves.
Who's the remainder of our Is everyone ready? It's just going to be why we like really clearly want it out, starting with our arguments. Is everyone ready?
He said we're gonna be clearly winning the round, and then he was like, "So you're gonna be live for 2 minutes."
We'll start our Delani evidence. We tell you really specifically, in the past 10 years, we have used OCOs more than we ever have before, but all we have seen is negative ramifications. Our big argument here is arms race. The Ferrante evidence is super specific in telling you that every time we use arms, it scares into other countries into retaliating. And what that turns into from the Andre evidence tells you that every single time we have used arms race, we have seen countries scale up capabilities, scale up tensions, and increase to conflict. We tell you that's really bad. The Chen evidence tells you those increased capabilities will drag us into an international conflict with huge countries. This is important for a couple of reasons. First is because of grid collapse. We tell you, when we get attacked, it will be attack on our grids. And if we take out the US power grids, not only will we have hospitals shutting down and food systems shutting down, but we will lose 9 out of 10 Americans due to starvation and disease because we don't have the power to prevent it. They give you a couple of responses. They tell you, when is it going to happen? We tell you in the near future. You can't predict a conflict, but we know it's going to come. Then they tell you, how is it going to come? We tell you the increase in capabilities will cause a conventional war or a cyber attack on our grids. They tell you there's no reason countries would attack. We tell you they're scared out of their minds and they're going to retaliate. When you corner a tiger, you give it no chance but to lash out. Then they tell you if we knock out OCOs, it's going to be peace. But when we attacked Iran, all they did was scale up conventions, and all we saw was tensions. Let's go to their arguments. First, they concede the response we make that tells you every single time we have used OCOs, we've seen terrorism increase because of disenfranchisement. But furthermore, on their Israel argument, their thesis of their argument is that when we give OCOs to Israel, they'll use it over conventional. The issue is, we just saw Israel attack Hamas with conventional weapons after Hamas cyber attacked them. I would say at the point where in their battleground where they try out their new weapons like the Iron Dome, we should have seen them use cyber attacks, but they won't because they don't like them. For all these reasons you negate.